do this thing. The question is, what happened when they took him, and what did they take? The dog barked through the town square. It was snow-covered. Brick buildings stood high. It was late, though, past midnight. Only a few windows showed the light of gas lamps shining through down into the frozen town square. The buildings were 3-4 stories high. This was downtown Alby. There was tall brick buildings nearby, and moonlight would shine down on a night like this, but tonight, instead, the snow fell. Everything was white. The buildings, the arches of windows, any overhangs, all were covered in 6 inches to a foot of the powdery snow. A tall building, this one 4 stories of brick like the others on this street. There is a window that still shows light through on the 3rd floor. We peer through the window, and I can see him in there. There is a older man, middle-aged. His brow is creased with worry as he bends over his writing desk. A fire burns in the hearth at this level. It is a well-appointed room, but messy, unkempt. There are papers spread about. There are candles that have been discarded, that went out, and we're left there, forgotten. There are knickknacks, artifacts, pieces of wood and stone that look like collector's items that are leaning against walls or gathered on tabletops. It's a big room, a large room. There's appointments for sitting, little sets, but even the chairs there where perhaps small meetings could be held, they too are covered with knickknacks and things, and there's dust and bits of feathers and such things on the carpet. The man is covered in a little shawl, little blanket over his hunched shoulders, and he writes with a quill pen, a fountain pen, quickly. It is not the hurry of a man who has no more time, but it is the hurry of a man who is at his wit's end and can't find anything else to do, so pours his soul out onto paper to try to find some way out of the mess he is in. He writes and writes. Finally, he folds the paper 3 times after dropping the dusting salts on it and blowing it off. He pours a little bit of the wax from the candle that sits by the paper onto the paper. He takes his stamp with his insignia on it, his family's arms, and he presses down into the wax. Lifts it up, looks at it, takes one breath, and gets up from his chair, drops the letter back on the table, and finally walks off to bed. Across town, there is the central station of Alby. Its arches join to show a griffin rampant at the front, standing judgment, standing protection, standing lordship over the city, the sign of the empire, the sign of Basilium, standing there, presiding over Alby. It is at this station for a reason, for these rails are the heartbeat of the empire. Whereas in other lands, perhaps City Hall, the mayor's office, perhaps the Lord's Manor, perhaps these places bear the insignia of the powers that be. Here, it is the rail stations. And even at this hour, you can hear the trains coming in, rolling down the tracks. One arrives now at this hour, and from its coaches, from its back coach, a few passengers emerge. This is a freight train But from one of the cars, some people come. They are dressed darkly in dark clothing, and they move with a crispness, a crisp efficiency. They wear all matching hats cast back to one side with the badges of office adorning them. They come out quickly, looking to each other, looking to their leadership for direction, and they move like swift shadows, like the shadows of crows through the streets. The man, having left his letter on the desk, having finally released enough that he is ready to retire for the evening. There's more to do, of course, the next day. There is much to do, but he makes it back to the master suite. He enters it and he finds that his wife is still awake. She cradles their little boy in her arms. She's looking down at him. And the man comes in and she looks up to him. "Isn't it past his bedtime?" he says. Yes, she says, "but he isn't sleeping well still." Cradling him. "He woke up again. He woke me up with his cries. I don't know why he can't just get a good night's rest." She says, "I think he has nightmares. He wakes up and it's so hard to soothe him." She peers down into his eyes, holding him, just looking down into his eyes. But she's nursing him. She says, "But once he's calm, he's such a sweetheart." And the man comes closer and reaches out and puts one arm around the small of her back and holds her there while she holds the baby standing in the room. And they both look down at the boy. And then a few heartbeats pass. They share this moment. It's really they treasure it. They know these moments of peace they don't take them for granted. These aren't two people who are new to the sorrows of the world. They don't take this for granted. They take this moment. They breathe into it. She looks up then, suddenly, startled. And he looks at her. "What?" She looks very uneasy for a minute. Her eyes kind of dart. She shakes herself. Says, Nothing. I thought I heard nothing." They put the boy back into his bed next to their own, and they move into bed. They're both exhausted and lie down. They may or may not both lie awake for a while in spite of their tiredness. So much is on their minds, but they do not speak again. Comes from the door. They are up immediately. They are on their feet. They are racing for the door. She is screaming. She says, "It's not them! You said they wouldn't!" And he says, I sent the letters! And they're moving for the doors. Before they reach it, though, even before they've made it to the door, it has burst open, and in has come the figures. At their lead is a man in this dark cloak. He steps in. The father is leveling, by this point already, a musket at the front of the door that he has pulled from where it hangs on the shelf. He is loading it. He's quick. He's already has it mostly loaded, and he's packed the powder. He's pulling back. The man at the door takes one look at him, and behind him has his cohort with him. He throws off his dark jacket then, and underneath is a pressed shirt, and pants that are all of starched white, long sleeves, long legs of the pants, all of starched white clothing. And he says, I am Johann Greggs. By order of the Basilium Court, I am here for one Dovid Molin. The father stops. His hands are shaking on the gun, but he keeps it leveled. And Johann says, after glancing around the room, looks back to the man with the gun trained on him and says, "Put that away, councilman. It is of no use." And watching the white-clad man, the father shakes for a moment longer and then slumps down. He actually falls to his knees and lets the gun fall to the side. Useless now. The white-clad man comes in. Johann comes in, and he glances around. He glances at the mother, who is sobbing in tears, and back to the father. The father says, looks up and says, the letters, the assembly, they promised me, and they promised me, they sent me. And Johann looks down for a moment. His eyes are cold and clear and piercing, and he says, "I am sorry for your loss, councilman. Where is the boy?" It is daytime, and the snow still covers the countryside. We see through deserted stretches of alpine wilderness. There are trees growing up. There are bushes and shrubs. There are stags, some deer standing in the snow here. And we hear in the distance the stage, or the steam coach, comes towards us, winding over the rails from the distance. It sends up a flurry of snow on both sides as it comes racing through the wilderness. It comes closer and closer, and we see, as it finally approaches through the ornate windows of the coach, we see a little infant boy. We just see his hand and his face through the window as his hand is pressed up against the window, and he's looking out for a bit through the glass. Far up overhead, perhaps the little boy can see this, perhaps not. Far up overhead, we hear the and there is an eagle circling overhead as the stagecoach passes through, or as the steam coach passes through the wilderness. He grew up in another place, by the seashore. He grew up where white-capped waves crash against the cliffs and the cold beaches of the island of Basilium. He grew up there, not in the capital city itself, but away among the towers and the houses of the people who had taken him. He grew up looking up at hard men and hard women, men and women who knew their duty and had all the tools they needed to accomplish it. Men and women who would brook no nonsense and made it very clear to him that this was so. Men and women who had been, like him, raised among hard men and hard women who were not their mothers and were not their fathers, and taught them everything they knew. In the summer, in those days, he had the time to swim and to play, sometimes with the other young ones who had been taken from their homes. He had memories of floating on his back in the ocean when it grew warm enough, just for those few months in the summer when it grew warm enough. He had no way of knowing it, but his father never sent that letter. His father never sent that letter because there was no reason to send it anymore. He He retired from politics the next year, which was in itself a blow to the empire, because Dovid learned much later when he was in the years of book learning, when he was in the years of his young adulthood and collecting all the knowledge of the world into his mind. He learned that his father had been one of the few voices for justice in the empire in those days. He had stood up for labor and for the oppressed classes who were used in the factories in those years. As best he could, he had advocated for gentle treatment during many of the uprisings that had occurred during his tenure. Most of the time he had been unheeded, but he had taken firm stances, and perhaps in the end it had cost him. Perhaps in the end, if he had saved a little more political capital, perhaps if he had been a little more conservative, perhaps his voice would have been heeded when it came to the matter that mattered most, the matter of his son. But Dovid never knew that his father wrote that last letter. Dovid never knew that his father never sent it. Instead, he grew up there on the seashore of Basilium, among hard men and hard women, where he learned to be just like them.